The sun had just begun to set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan Cole leaned back in the back seat of his sleek black car, watching the familiar skyline glide by. He had finished his business trip a day earlier than planned. His meetings had gone better than expected, and for once, he felt like taking a small break from the endless boardrooms and phone calls. He thought it would be nice to go home early and surprise his family. His wife, Vanessa, loved surprises, and his 2 children always ran to hug him whenever he came back from a trip. The thought made him smile. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Heading straight home, sir?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, David. Straight home. Let's not tell anyone I'm coming. I want it to be a surprise." The car sped through the smooth roads leading to the countryside, where the Cole mansion stood. The mansion was a large cream-colored estate surrounded by green gardens, a small lake, and rows of tall trees. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything Ethan had worked for. He had built his empire from scratch, starting with a small business loan years ago. Now, his name was known across the country as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region. But more than fame or money, Ethan valued peace at home. His mansion was his safe place, far from the chaos of the business world. When the car entered through the grand gates, the guards stood at attention. Ethan waved at them with a polite smile. He noticed that the lights inside the mansion were already on, though it wasn't dark yet. That was strange. Vanessa usually waited until evening to turn them on. He brushed off the thought and stepped out of the car, adjusting his coat. The air smelled faintly of roses from the garden, but something felt off. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. Usually, when Ethan arrived home, there was always some sound in the background. His children playing, the cook talking to the maid, or Vanessa humming while walking through the hall. But now there was nothing, just silence. He frowned slightly and entered through the large front door. His shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked into the grand hallway. The housekeeper wasn't there to greet him, as she always did. That was unusual. He set his briefcase on a nearby table and looked around. Everything seemed perfectly in place. The vases, the paintings, the elegant staircase. But the air carried a strange tension. As he walked deeper into the house, he heard something faint. It was soft at first, like a whisper. Then it came again, a muffled sound, like someone sobbing. Ethan stopped in his tracks. He tilted his head and listened carefully. The sound was coming from the living room. Slowly, he walked in that direction, careful not to make too much noise. As he got closer, the sound became clearer. A child crying quietly. His eyebrows drew together. His children were at their grandmother's house this weekend. Who could it be? He reached the doorway and froze. Inside the large living room, lit by the golden chandelier, stood a small girl. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her hair was long and neatly tied, but her face was red, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She stood trembling near the wall, clutching the edge of her dress. In front of her stood Vanessa. Ethan's wife was dressed elegantly as always. A silk blouse, diamond earrings, and perfectly styled hair. But her face was twisted with anger. She was speaking sharply, her tone cold and hard. Ethan could only catch bits and pieces of what she said. The words were sharp enough to make him frown. "How dare you?" And, "You stupid girl." He took a slow step closer, trying to understand what was happening. Then he saw the maid, Maria, standing nearby, her face pale and eyes wide. She looked terrified, her hands clasped tightly together. The scene didn't make sense. Ethan had never seen Vanessa lose control before. She was strict sometimes, yes, but never cruel. And Maria had been with them for years, quiet, loyal, and hardworking. Her daughter, Lily, sometimes came to the mansion after school and helped with small chores or played in the garden. Ethan had always seen her as a sweet, polite child. He stayed still for a moment, not wanting to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But when Vanessa suddenly raised her hand, Ethan's body tensed instinctively. He saw her palm land across the little girl's cheek. The sound echoed through the room. Lily gasped softly and covered her face, her small shoulders shaking as she began to cry harder. Ethan stepped forward immediately. Vanessa! His voice was deep and firm. The entire room froze. Vanessa turned sharply. Her face drained of color when she saw him standing there. Ethan? She stammered. You're home early? Ethan's eyes shifted from her to the trembling child, then to Maria, who was now in tears. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. What's going on here? He asked calmly, but with clear disappointment in his tone. Vanessa tried to compose herself, brushing her hair back. She broke one of the crystal vases in the hallway, she said quickly. It was an antique. Do you have any idea how much it cost? I was just teaching her a lesson. Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked at the small girl again. Lily stood motionless, afraid to even lift her eyes. Her hands trembled as she held the hem of her dress. A faint red mark had begun to form on her cheek. A lesson? He said softly. By hitting a child? Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Ethan stepped closer to the girl and knelt down slowly so he was at her eye level. His voice softened. Lily, he said gently, are you hurt? The little girl shook her head quickly, though her eyes were full of tears. No, sir, she whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break it. It just slipped. Ethan gave her a small reassuring nod. It's all right, he said quietly. Accidents happen. He stood up and turned back to Vanessa, who was now visibly uncomfortable under his calm but firm gaze. We'll talk later, he said curtly. He gestured for Maria to take Lily out of the room. The maid quickly nodded, thanking him under her breath as she guided her daughter away. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan looked around the elegant room, the polished floors, the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, and for the first time it all felt hollow. He had worked hard his entire life to build a home that stood for love, respect, and dignity. Yet, in that moment, it felt like something precious had broken, something far more valuable than any antique vase. Vanessa tried to speak again. Ethan, you don't understand. He raised a hand gently, cutting her off. Not now, he said. His tone was calm, but there was a weight behind it that made her fall silent. Without another word, Ethan walked out of the living room. He needed time to think, to breathe. As he climbed the grand staircase to his study, he could still hear the faint echo of Lily's sobs in his mind. It bothered him deeply. He had seen many things in the business world. Greed, lies, betrayal. But seeing cruelty inside his own home was something he wasn't prepared for. When he reached his study, he sat down at his desk and looked out the large window. The sun had set completely now, leaving the sky a deep blue. The city lights twinkled in the distance. He thought about the little girl's tear-streaked face and the fear in her eyes. He thought about Maria, who had always served them with loyalty and grace. And he thought about Vanessa's anger. Sharp, unnecessary, and out of place. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He had come home early hoping for peace, for laughter, for warmth. Instead, he had found something that shook the foundation of what he believed his family stood for. Something was wrong, and he knew it couldn't be ignored. Outside, the wind rustled the trees softly. Inside, the mansion felt colder than ever. Ethan sat in silence, unaware that this moment, his unexpected return home, was only the beginning of a series of events that would change everything for his family forever. The night passed slowly inside the mansion. Ethan barely slept. He kept turning in bed, his mind replaying what he had seen in the living room. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see Lily's frightened face and hear her quiet sobs. The house was peaceful again, but that peace now felt heavy, forced. He had always believed his home was built on respect, but what he had seen made him question everything. The next morning, the sun rose bright and warm. Birds sang in the garden, and the light spilled softly through the tall windows. Ethan was already awake, sitting in his study with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was lost in thought when a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he said quietly. Maria stepped inside, holding a small tray. Her eyes were red, and her hands shook slightly as she set the tray on the desk. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice low. Ethan gave her a gentle nod. Good morning, Maria. How is Lily? She's better now, Maria said, looking down. She cried herself to sleep last night, but she's calmer this morning. I told her you weren't angry with her. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Of course I'm not. She did nothing wrong. Maria nodded, tears forming again. Thank you, sir. She looks up to you. She didn't mean to cause any trouble. She just wanted to help me clean the hallway. Ethan sighed. Maria, I want you to know I'm truly sorry for what happened yesterday. What my wife did was unacceptable. You both didn't deserve that. Maria quickly shook her head. Please, sir, don't apologize. You have always been kind to us. I know Madam was upset. Maybe she just had a bad day. Ethan gave a faint, sad smile. Even then, anger should never fall on a child. Maria hesitated, then nodded silently. She thanked him again and left the room quietly. As the door closed behind her, Ethan leaned back in his chair. He wasn't just angry, he was disappointed. Not just in Vanessa, but in himself. He had been away too much lately, leaving everything in her hands. Maybe he had failed to notice things that had been happening under his own roof. Downstairs, Vanessa was sitting at the breakfast table reading the newspaper. She looked calm as though nothing had happened. The scent of fresh coffee and toast filled the room. When Ethan walked in, she looked up with a polite smile. Good morning, she said casually, as if they hadn't faced a storm the night before. Ethan didn't sit down right away. He poured himself a glass of water and stood quietly for a moment. We need to talk, he said finally. Vanessa set down her cup and sighed. About yesterday? Yes, he said. About what you did to that little girl. She frowned slightly, her tone defensive. Ethan, I told you already. She broke a vase. Do you know how rare that piece was? Ethan looked at her, his expression calm but firm. It doesn't matter what she broke. She's a child, Vanessa. You could have spoken to her. You didn't need to raise your hand. Vanessa looked away. You're making it sound worse than it was. It was just one slap. I didn't hurt her badly. Ethan's voice grew quieter. That's not the point. You frightened her. And you humiliated Maria in front of her daughter. That's not the kind of home I want to keep. There was a long pause. Vanessa crossed her arms. You're overreacting, Ethan. You always take the help side. Maybe that's why they don't respect me. He studied her for a moment, unsure whether to be angry or just disappointed. Respect isn't built through fear, he said quietly. She didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, clearly upset, and left the dining room. Ethan let her go. Arguing wouldn't solve anything right now. He needed to think about what to do next. Later that morning, Ethan walked out to the garden. The air was crisp and fresh. He saw Lily sitting on a bench near the fountain, holding a small book in her hands. She looked up nervously when she saw him, then quickly looked down again. Ethan smiled gently and walked toward her. Mind if I sit here? He asked. She shook her head, and he sat beside her. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the water trickle from the fountain. That's a nice book you have there, he said kindly. Lily nodded shyly. It's about a girl who wants to travel the world. That sounds wonderful, Ethan said. Do you like reading? She nodded again. Yes, sir. I read when Mama's working. She says books make you brave. Ethan smiled softly. Your mother is right. Lily hesitated, then whispered, Sir, I'm sorry about the vase. I didn't mean to break it. Ethan shook his head gently. You don't have to say sorry. Things can be replaced. People can't. She looked at him, confused but comforted by his tone. Mama said you were very kind. I didn't think someone rich could be kind like that. Ethan smiled faintly. Kindness doesn't depend on money, Lily. It depends on what's in your heart. The little girl smiled back. A small, hesitant smile, but it was enough. Ethan felt something soften inside him. In that moment, he knew he had made the right choice by coming home early. After a while, Maria came to call Lily inside. She thanked Ethan quietly, her eyes full of gratitude. When they left, Ethan sat alone in the garden, deep in thought. The sound of the water and the chirping of the birds calmed him, but he knew he couldn't ignore what had happened. He needed to address it properly. As the day went on, the atmosphere in the house remained tense. Vanessa avoided Ethan, keeping to her room most of the day. The staff moved quietly, clearly aware that something had happened. Ethan noticed how they looked down when Vanessa passed by, not out of respect, but out of fear. That afternoon, one of his old friends, Daniel, came by for a brief business visit. Ethan welcomed the distraction. As they talked in the study, Daniel noticed something was bothering him. "You look troubled," Daniel said. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, then told him what had happened. Daniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. When Ethan finished, Daniel leaned forward. "You know, Ethan," he said slowly, "sometimes when people have too much comfort, they forget what kindness looks like. Maybe your wife needs to be reminded." Ethan nodded. "I think you're right. I just don't know how to reach her anymore. She wasn't always like this." "People change when they stop being grateful," Daniel said. "But you're doing the right thing. That little girl will remember your kindness for the rest of her life." After Daniel left, Ethan felt a little lighter, but he also knew he had to take responsibility for what happened under his roof. That evening, he called the entire household staff into the main hall. Vanessa wasn't there. She had gone out for a social event in the city. Ethan stood in front of everyone, his voice calm and steady. "I want to speak to all of you," he began. "I know what happened yesterday has upset many of you. I want you to know that this house should be a place of respect and safety for everyone who works here. You are not just employees. You are part of what makes this home run every day." The staff listened closely. Maria stood at the back, holding Lily's hand. Ethan continued, "If anyone ever feels disrespected or mistreated, you can come to me directly. No one should feel afraid here. Not ever." He looked around the room, his gaze steady. "Let's make sure what happened yesterday never happens again." A quiet murmur of gratitude ran through the staff. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She whispered a soft thank you, and Ethan nodded back. That night, as Ethan walked through the empty halls, he thought about what had changed in his home. He realized that sometimes wealth builds walls not just around houses, but around hearts. And those walls could only be broken down with empathy and understanding. When Vanessa returned later that night, she found him sitting by the fireplace. The flickering light cast long shadows across the room. "You talked to the staff," she said quietly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "They deserved to hear it from me." Vanessa sighed, setting her purse down. "Ethan, I didn't mean to make things worse. I just lost my temper. You know how much pressure I've been under lately." Ethan looked at her, his tone calm but honest. "I understand stress. I live with it every day. But we can't let pressure turn us into people we don't recognize. Not in front of those who depend on us." She looked away, quiet for a long moment. For the first time, her voice softened. "Maybe I did go too far." Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply said, "We can do better, all of us." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees gently. Inside, the house finally felt a little lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally been spoken. And for Ethan, that was the first step toward healing what had been broken. The following morning began quietly, but something felt different in the air. Ethan woke up early and stepped out onto the balcony that overlooked the garden. The sunlight spread gently across the lawn, and he could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. It should have been peaceful, but his mind was far from calm. The memory of what had happened still lingered. Even though things had settled on the surface, Ethan knew that the peace in the house was fragile. He had tried to talk to Vanessa again late at night, but the conversation had gone nowhere. She had said she regretted losing her temper, yet her words felt distant, as if she was saying them just to end the discussion. Ethan wanted to believe she meant it, but deep down, he sensed that something inside her had changed over the years. The warmth and compassion that once made her special seemed buried under layers of pride and coldness. After breakfast, Ethan went to his office in town to handle a few urgent meetings. The drive was long, but it gave him time to think. He kept wondering how things had gotten this way. When he and Vanessa first married, they had shared simple dreams: to build a good life, raise a kind family, and never forget where they came from. But as wealth and success grew, so did distance and formality. Somewhere along the way, empathy had been lost. At the office, Ethan finished his work early. He couldn't stop thinking about the mansion, about Lily and Maria, and how they might be feeling after everything. He decided to return home sooner than planned. When he arrived, the mansion was quiet again. The staff moved carefully through the halls, their voices low. It was as if everyone was still holding their breath. He walked into the kitchen and saw Maria washing dishes. Lily sat nearby, coloring quietly on a small notepad. When she saw Ethan, her eyes brightened. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely. Ethan smiled. "Good afternoon, Lily. What are you drawing?" She turned the notepad toward him. It was a simple picture of a garden, full of flowers and trees, with a big house in the background. Near the fountain, she had drawn a man and a small girl feeding birds together. Ethan recognized himself and smiled warmly. "That's beautiful," he said. "You're quite an artist." Lily smiled shyly. "Mama says drawing helps me stay happy." "Your mama is right," Ethan replied. Maria looked up from the sink and smiled softly. "Thank you for checking on her, sir. She's feeling much better now." "I'm glad to hear that," Ethan said. He paused for a moment. "Maria, I want to talk to you later about something important. Do you have a few minutes this evening?" Maria looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, sir." Later that day, Ethan sat in his study reviewing some documents when Vanessa came in. She looked tired, her usual calm replaced by frustration. "Are we really going to keep talking about this incident?" she asked sharply. Ethan closed the file and looked up. "It's not just about one incident, Vanessa. It's about what it means. I'm worried about how things have been lately. The staff feels uneasy, and you seem unhappy most of the time. I want to understand why." Vanessa crossed her arms. "I'm not unhappy. I just expect order in this house. Maybe you've forgotten what discipline looks like." Ethan frowned slightly. "Discipline is not the same as cruelty. You can be firm without being unkind." She looked away. "You always make me sound like the villain. Maybe I wouldn't have to be so strict if people actually listened." "Vanessa," he said gently, "the people here respect you. But respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn." Her expression softened for a moment. She turned to look out the window. "Do you ever feel like everything is just too much?" she said quietly. "This house, these expectations, the way people look at us. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a glass box." Ethan was silent for a moment. He hadn't expected her to admit that. "Then maybe it's time to open a window," he said softly. "We don't have to live like that, Vanessa. We can choose something better. But that starts with how we treat people, even those who serve us." Vanessa didn't reply. She left the study quietly, leaving Ethan deep in thought. He could see that she was struggling in her own way, though she hid it behind pride and anger. He decided he wouldn't push her further that day. Instead, he focused on what he could control, making things right for Maria and her daughter. That evening, as promised, Maria came to his study. She stood nervously at the door until Ethan motioned for her to sit. "Maria," he began, "I know what happened has been hard for both you and Lily. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable here. If you need a few days off, I can arrange it." Maria shook her head quickly. "Thank you, sir, but I can't afford to take days off. I need the work." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand, but please know that you and your daughter are safe here. I won't allow anything like that to happen again." Tears filled Maria's eyes. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. You have always treated us kindly. Lily looks up to you like a father." Ethan smiled faintly. "She's a good child. She deserves a good life." He paused for a moment, thinking, "Maria, have you ever thought about sending her to a better school? One where she could study and grow her talents?" Maria looked surprised. "Oh, sir, I could never afford that. The schools you mean cost more than I make in a year." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Then let me help. I can arrange for her tuition. Think of it as a gift for her hard work and good heart. No strings attached. Maria's mouth fell open in shock. Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not too much, Ethan said gently. Lily has potential. Don't let money stop her from becoming what she can be. Let me do this. Maria covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to thank you enough. Ethan smiled kindly. Just promise me one thing. Keep her dreaming big. That's all I want. After Maria left, Ethan sat quietly for a long time. For the first time in days, he felt a small sense of peace. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could make sure something good came from it. Later that night, he walked through the halls and stopped by Lily's room. The door was slightly open. Inside, she was fast asleep, her little hand still clutching a pencil. The half-finished drawing on the bedside table showed a big house surrounded by smiling people. Not just the rich family, but everyone. Together. Ethan smiled softly and closed the door gently. The next morning, Vanessa joined him in the garden. She looked more composed than the day before. I heard what you did for Maria and her daughter, she said quietly. Ethan turned to her. I just wanted to help. Felt right. Vanessa nodded slowly. You're a better person than I am sometimes, she said, her tone softer than usual. I don't always understand how you stay so calm. It's not easy, he said. But anger never builds anything. It only breaks what's already fragile. She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. Maybe I've forgotten that. Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply said, It's never too late to remember. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the mansion began to shift. Vanessa became quieter but less harsh. She started spending time in the garden again, something she hadn't done in years. Sometimes Ethan would catch her watching Lily play from a distance, not with judgment, but with something close to reflection. Maria continued her work, though Ethan noticed she seemed lighter, more at ease. Lily's laughter began to echo through the halls again, soft but genuine. For the first time in a long while, the mansion felt like a home instead of just a house. Ethan knew the road ahead was still long. Trust takes time to rebuild, and change doesn't happen overnight. But he also knew that small acts of kindness could heal even the deepest cracks. As he sat in the garden one afternoon, watching Lily chase butterflies while Maria smiled nearby, he felt a quiet gratitude. Sometimes, he thought, the most powerful moments in life aren't the ones that make headlines or involve grand gestures. They're the simple ones. A kind word, a gentle apology, a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, that was what true wealth was all about. The next morning came quietly. The mansion felt heavy with silence, like the walls themselves were trying to forget what had happened the night before. The soft light of dawn slipped through the tall windows, falling across the marble floor. It was beautiful as always, but something about it felt different, colder, almost sad. Ethan woke early. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been spinning all night, replaying every detail he had seen. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that frightened little girl standing there, her tiny hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking as she cried. It broke something inside him. He had built this home with the hope that it would be filled with love, care, and safety. But now he wondered how something so cruel could have taken place under his roof. He sat quietly by the window in his study, staring out at the garden. The gardener was already at work, trimming the bushes neatly as he always did. The world outside seemed normal, peaceful, but inside nothing felt the same. After a while, Ethan stood up and walked slowly toward the kitchen. He found the house staff moving quietly, avoiding eye contact. They had heard what had happened. Whispers had spread quickly through the halls. The cook, who usually greeted him cheerfully every morning, kept her head down as she prepared breakfast. Ethan gave a polite nod and poured himself a cup of coffee. As he stood there, he saw Maria, the maid, standing near the back door with her daughter. The little girl was dressed neatly in a simple dress, holding her mother's hand tightly. Her eyes still looked swollen from crying, but she tried to hide it. When she saw Ethan, she lowered her head shyly. Ethan walked toward them slowly. "Good morning," he said softly. Maria looked startled, unsure how to respond. "Good morning, sir," she whispered. He crouched down slightly to meet the little girl's eyes. "How are you feeling today?" he asked gently. She hesitated before whispering, "I'm okay, sir." He nodded. "You're very brave, you know that?" he said kindly. A tiny smile flickered across her lips. Then Ethan looked at Maria. "I'm so sorry for what happened yesterday. You and your daughter didn't deserve that. Not in my home." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. I've worked in many houses, but no one has ever said that to me. I'm just grateful you were here." Ethan took a deep breath. "You shouldn't have to be grateful for basic respect. That should be normal." He paused for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "I want you both to take the day off. Go somewhere quiet. Rest. And don't worry. Your jobs are safe." Maria tried to protest, but he gently waved his hand. "Please," he said firmly. "Just do this for me." She nodded slowly and left with her daughter, holding her close as they stepped outside. Ethan watched them go, then turned back toward the quiet kitchen. The coffee had gone cold in his cup, but he didn't care. He knew he couldn't let this go. Not just because of what had happened, but because it revealed something deeper, something he had ignored for too long. He had been so busy running companies, signing deals, attending meetings, that he hadn't truly seen what was happening at home. Maybe this was his fault too, in a way. Later that morning, Vanessa came down the stairs. She was dressed elegantly as always, her expression calm but distant. When she saw Ethan, she hesitated. He stood up straight and looked at her without saying a word. "Ethan," she began softly, "I know what you saw yesterday looked bad, but you have to understand." "Understand what?" he interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "That you raised your hand to a child? That you scared her so badly she couldn't even speak?" Vanessa took a step back, caught off guard by the calm anger in his voice. "It wasn't like that," she said defensively. "She broke something valuable, Ethan. That vase was antique." "It was a vase," he said coldly. "An object. You can replace it. But do you know what you can't replace?" The look of fear in that little girl's eyes. Vanessa's lips trembled slightly. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I lost my temper." "Losing your temper doesn't excuse cruelty," Ethan said. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Vanessa, I don't know what's happened to us. I used to think we built this life together out of love and kindness. But now, it feels like I don't even recognize this home anymore." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. Vanessa finally looked away. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "I want you to think about the person you've become. And I want you to apologize to that little girl. Not because I told you to, but because it's the right thing to do." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew he was right. She nodded slightly and turned away, walking toward the stairs again. Her steps were slower this time. The rest of the day passed quietly. Ethan spent hours going through paperwork in his study, but his mind wasn't on business. He kept thinking about Maria and her daughter. He thought about how many people like them worked hard every day, often invisible, often mistreated by those who thought money gave them power. That evening, Maria returned with her daughter to gather their things. Ethan met them in the hallway. "Did you have a good day?" he asked kindly. Maria smiled faintly. "We went to the park, sir. Lily played on the swings. It was the first time she laughed in a while." Ethan smiled gently. "I'm glad." Then he looked down at Lily. "Would you like to go to school, Lily?" The little girl looked up in surprise. "I'd love to, sir. But Mama can't afford it." Ethan nodded. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. I'll take care of your schooling. Every child deserves a chance to learn." Maria gasped, her eyes wide. "Sir, we can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not too much," Ethan interrupted gently. "It's the least I can do." Maria broke down crying, thanking him again and again. Ethan felt a deep warmth spread through him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the feeling of pride or power. It was something simpler, something purer. It was the feeling of doing something truly right. Later that night, Vanessa came to his study. She looked pale and tired, holding a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I wrote a letter," she said quietly, "for the maid's daughter. I want to apologize." Ethan looked up at her, surprised. "That's good," he said simply. She nodded. "I don't expect her to forgive me, but I need to do it. For myself too." For the first time in a long while, Ethan saw something soft in her eyes, a trace of the woman he once knew. He didn't say anything more, just nodded in quiet approval. The next morning, Vanessa gave the letter to Maria, who accepted it politely but cautiously. Ethan watched as Lily read it slowly, her little face serious. Then she looked up and whispered, "It's okay, ma'am." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She whispered a thank you and turned away, her shoulders trembling slightly. From that day on, things began to change in the house. Ethan made sure every staff member was treated with kindness and respect. He also spent more time at home, making an effort to connect with the people who worked there. He realized that true leadership didn't come from commanding others. It came from understanding them. For Vanessa, the change was slower. She became quieter, more reflective. She stopped throwing lavish parties and began volunteering at a local children's center. Perhaps she was trying to make peace with herself. Weeks passed, and slowly, warmth began to return to the mansion. The laughter of workers filled the air again, and Lily's giggles could sometimes be heard echoing down the halls. Ethan often watched her playing in the garden, feeling a quiet pride. He knew the scars of that day might never completely fade, but he also knew something important had been rebuilt, a sense of humanity. He had seen how one act of cruelty could tear everything apart, but also how compassion could slowly put it back together. As he stood by the window one afternoon, watching the sunlight dance across the flowers, he realized something. All the wealth in the world meant nothing if it wasn't used to make life better for others. That was the lesson he would carry forward, the one that truly left everyone stunned. Months passed, and the mansion that once felt cold and tense began to change. The sunlight seemed warmer, the air lighter. It was as if the house itself had started to heal. Ethan had kept his promise to help Maria and her daughter, Lily. He had arranged for them to move into a small but comfortable apartment near a good school. Every morning, Lily would leave for class with her backpack bouncing, waving cheerfully at the driver who took her there. Ethan visited them sometimes on weekends, not as an employer, but as a friend. He always brought something simple for Lily, a book, a drawing set, or fresh flowers from the garden. He wanted her to grow up remembering kindness, not fear. Each time he visited, Maria would thank him quietly, still amazed at how much their lives had changed because of one unexpected moment. Back at the mansion, things were quieter now. Vanessa had become distant after everything that happened. She spent most of her days reading or volunteering at the children's center. It was clear she was trying to change, to understand what she had done and who she had become. Sometimes, Ethan saw her sitting alone on the balcony, lost in thought. They spoke less than before, but when they did, their conversations were calmer, more honest. One evening, Ethan was working in his study when he heard a gentle knock at the door. It was Vanessa. She stepped in slowly, holding a small photo frame. "Do you remember this?" she asked, placing it on the desk. It was a picture of them taken years ago, standing in front of the unfinished mansion, both smiling, full of dreams. Ethan looked at the photo for a long time before speaking. "We were happy then," he said softly. "We were simple then," Vanessa replied. "Somewhere along the way, I think we lost that. I lost that." He nodded. There was no anger in his voice anymore, just a quiet acceptance. "Maybe we both did," he said. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about what matters, about people who don't have what we do, about how easy it is to forget kindness when life becomes comfortable." Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. He could see how much she had changed. The pride in her voice was gone. There was only sincerity now. "I don't expect you to forgive me completely," Vanessa said, But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for appearances, for myself. Ethan smiled faintly. That's a start. After that evening, they began to talk more often. Sometimes over dinner, sometimes while walking through the garden. Their relationship was fragile, but there was effort on both sides. They knew things could never go back to how they were, but maybe they could build something new, something real. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan decided to visit the children's center where Vanessa volunteered. He didn't tell her he was coming. When he arrived, he found her surrounded by children, helping them paint small clay pots. She was laughing, a genuine soft laugh that he hadn't heard in years. Watching her like that, Ethan realized that sometimes people needed to fall apart to truly rebuild themselves. When the activity ended, Vanessa looked up and saw him standing at the door. She smiled, a little embarrassed. "You came?" she asked. "I wanted to see what keeps you so busy these days," he said with a small grin. She handed him a paintbrush. "Then you might as well join in." That afternoon, they painted with the children, laughing at the mess they made. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something light in his heart. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was understanding. Over the next few months, Ethan became more involved in charity work. He started a foundation that provided education and shelter to children from struggling families. He often thought about how much his perspective had changed because of that one painful day. He had seen the worst side of privilege, but he had also discovered the strength of compassion. Meanwhile, Maria and Lily thrived in their new life. Lily was doing well in school, always top of her class. Maria often sent updates, along with little thank you notes written in Lily's neat handwriting. Each one made Ethan smile. One day, as Ethan sat in his office reviewing some papers, he received a letter from Lily. It was short but heartfelt. "Dear Sir, thank you for helping me and Mama. I love going to school. My teacher says I can be anything I want when I grow up. I want to help people like you do. Thank you for making our lives happy. Love, Lily." Ethan read the letter twice, his eyes softening. He placed it carefully in his desk drawer, beside the family photo. That small piece of paper meant more to him than any business award he had ever received. That evening, he and Vanessa had dinner together in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Vanessa poured tea for both of them and said quietly, "I heard you started a foundation. I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled. "It's something I should have done long ago, but I guess I needed a reason to see what really matters." She nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes life gives us lessons in the hardest ways." "Yes," he said, looking up at the fading light. "But maybe that's how we grow." For a while, they sat in silence, sipping their tea. The sound of crickets filled the air. Felt peaceful, not perfect, but real. Weeks later, Ethan was invited to speak at a community event organized by his foundation. The hall was full of families, volunteers, and children. As he stood at the podium, he looked around the crowd and spotted Maria and Lily sitting near the front. They waved at him, smiling brightly. He began his speech slowly, in his usual calm tone. "When I was younger, I believed success was measured by what you own, the houses, the cars, the companies. But now, I know that real success is measured by what you give, and how you treat people when no one is watching." He paused for a moment, scanning the audience. "A while ago, I witnessed something in my own home that changed my life. It reminded me that no amount of money can replace kindness, and no title can make you truly respected unless you act with humanity." The audience listened in silence, hanging on his words. Ethan smiled softly. "Today, I want to dedicate this foundation to all those who have been overlooked or mistreated. You matter. Your worth isn't defined by your status, but by your heart." When he finished, the audience stood and applauded. It wasn't just a polite response, it was genuine appreciation. Maria wiped her eyes, and Lily clapped with all her energy, her face glowing with pride. After the event, Vanessa joined him on stage. She squeezed his hand gently. "You did well," she said. Ethan smiled. "We both did. We turned something painful into something good." Later that night, as they drove home, the city lights shimmered outside the window. Vanessa leaned her head against the seat, whispering, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if you hadn't come home early that day?" Ethan looked out the window, thinking for a moment. "All the time," he said. "But maybe everything happens for a reason. Maybe that day was meant to open our eyes." Vanessa nodded. "It opened my heart too," she said quietly. When they reached home, Ethan walked through the familiar halls and stopped in front of the grand staircase. He looked around the house. The same marble floors, the same chandeliers, but it no longer felt cold. Felt alive again. The laughter of the staff, the hum of life, the sense of peace. It was all back. He turned to Vanessa, who was standing behind him, and smiled. "We have a lot to be thankful for," he said. She nodded. "Yes, we do." That night, Ethan went to his study and sat by the window, looking at the stars. He thought about Maria, Lily, Vanessa, and everything that had changed. He realized that the true wealth he had wasn't in his bank accounts or his companies. It was in the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had learned. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely at peace. The journey had been painful, but it had led him to something far more valuable than riches, a heart that understood compassion. And as he sat there, listening to the quiet sounds of the night, he smiled softly to himself. Sometimes, he thought, it takes losing sight of what you have to truly see what matters. That was the truth that left everyone stunned.